Hey, welcome back everyone. Man, COVID-19 is doing wonders for fishing down here in Louisiana. Sales of saltwater fishing license is up 200% in April versus April 2019. So there you go. If you thought people in Louisiana fished a lot before this, twice as many people are fishing now, and it's reflected in the pressure and the number of boats that we're all seeing on the water. We're seeing each other on the water, so not pointing any blame. I'm just really glad that everybody's able to get out and enjoy fishing at this time when there's no sports, no concerts. We missed all of our spring festivals, but we can still fish, and that is incredible. Certainly keeping me going. So windy. It has been a windy April, maybe March, April, and windy May. May is often stiller, but not this year. We've had incredible west wind. And in this video, you're going to see a fishing trip, the first day of a 2-day fishing trip down in the Leeville area. Not as clear today as I'd hoped this morning. It's not supposed to rain, but those clouds don't look that great. We gotta head out. Something. Good sign. So it's my belief that there are two main problems that are created by wind, which attribute to the poor bite that you often get when you're fishing in windy conditions. And number one, the bait can get scattered, especially when you have shrimp. They really move around a lot with water currents, more than the fin fish like mullets and pogies and that sort of thing. So the shrimp really get pushed around a lot by what's going on in the environment. And then the other thing is water turbidity, or the water stain, what we call dirty water. And you know what I'm talking about. Now, there are differences in dirty water because water carries 3 particles, the water down here. It's either going to be sand, which is the heaviest one, and that falls out pretty quickly, pretty readily. Then there's silt, which again still made from rock, basically rock and minerals, but it's smaller than sand, and it still drops out pretty easily. And then there's the really small particles, which are clay. And those are a real problem. They don't easily fall out. They repel each other, and so sometimes they just won't fall out, and it just takes a long time to get them to fall out. So clay, suspended clay, is the very worst condition to fish in. And you can see the difference, not necessarily by what you would think of as clarity, but you can see it more in color. Because the clay is a little browner, darker brown, and the sand and silt, you can actually sometimes just see the particles. You can just see a little bit of graininess in there, and that's sand and silt. And I think it's a little bit lighter in brown color down here in Louisiana. I don't think it's such an issue with stained water due to sand and silt. In fact, I think that trout can use that color as ambush. So if there's clear water, say you have a point that has a lot of water going across, and it's just kind of a sandy point, and it looks like it's stained, and then next to it is clear water. I've often found that trout will be hiding just inside the stained water, that sand-stained water, and just next to the clear water, and it's very good ambush territory. I haven't found any agreement among biologists on why the clay particle turbidity is an issue, but they all seem to agree that it's probably related to respiration at some point, because you have these fine particles on the gills. but it does cause weight loss and it interferes with growth of the fish. So definitely not something that speckled trout seem to try to avoid when they can. And you can find less clay, less turbidity in the water, even on these bad days if you look around, but you've got to look for some protected areas. So it could be the backside of islands, it could be points where you're a protected point where you'll be able to see a difference in the color.
There's one. I seen him come get it on that carcass.
Ah,
Too. That's a nice one.
whoa.
As soon as it hit the water, I seen him come get it. It bounced off the rock and it was laying right against them rocks.
Oh man.
I seen him when he hit it. That's
Nice.
a nice fish. Oh, hell yeah. Oh, he come off.
That's a good one.
First cast with that carcass.
Now they're right up on the rock.
Right on the rock.
I mean, that makes sense. That's definitely
And that corky won't
Place
go down
they'll
to
be.
the bottom like that jig.
right.
You got a second for it to sit in that water where they can see it.
Wow, look at all the bait I see.
I know.
Whoa.
I know.
A lot of bait.
When I threw that corky up there and it bounced in there, that's something after them or that your line?
That's me scaring them. I'm putting my big old subwalk right through them. Right. And you know, when you're in these windy conditions like this, it really helps to use something that some sort of bait you can search with. Now, you know, I don't fish live bait really at all anymore, but that was always one thing that kind of annoyed me about live bait. It was harder to search for the trout that way because you tended to anchor in one spot and then you throw your bait out, and it's just hard to keep moving when you're doing that. But if you're using artificials, especially if you're using hard baits, maybe you're throwing some kind of twitch bait or top water, great search bait, or jerk baits, even jigs. I mean, they can all be used very well, but the top water is a really good search bait, as well as a popping cork with a swim bait on it. And so you can search areas relatively quickly and effectively to see if you get any kind of response. And when you get a response, you know, it could just be a hit that is clearly a trout hit, but especially if you catch a trout, you know, you can assume that the trout in the estuary in your area that you're fishing are, you know, they're biologically the same. So they're probably going to act the same, which means that if you find one trout, say along the rock jetties, then there's going to be more there. Now they might necessarily be real easy to catch like is happening today, but they are there, and you've really got to focus in on those patterns that you discover when you're searching an area. Oh dang, that was a freaking fish.
Was it?
Yeah,
Look, it hung up.
I thought it was hung up.
That's one. Oh yeah. Nice fish. Nice trout.
Don's been getting into the trout. Yeah, nice fish. So we are out here starting a couple days fishing in Leeville, and it was a rough. Last night we went out just before dark. It was found some clean water near the Leeville, but there weren't any trout in there to speak of. A couple little ones. And it's been really windy. It's been windy every week, so we're struggling with that. But this morning it was really rough out here, Bell Pass, but we're finding a few decent trout. So summertime and windy conditions are a lot worse and harder to deal with then wintertime, are the other 3 seasons, because you've got the marsh. The trout are in the marsh. You can go into the marsh, you can find protected water, you can find clean water. If you do that now, you can still find the clean water on a bad day, like today, too much west wind, dirty water, but the trout aren't going to be there because the water is too low in salinity. So the trick is to find areas where you can find protected water, but you're still in the high salinity zone, on these windy days. And so if we look at the region, you'll see that it's a little easier to do in certain parts of the coastline of Louisiana than it is in other areas. Let's start on the east side. You'll see that you've got a big sound on the outside. This is Chandelier and Brenton Sounds with Barrier Islands, Chandeliers on the outside. And this is like 20 miles across here. So this is a really big piece of water. And so when you've got strong winds east or west, you're going to have, or even south, but that west wind is going to make that area very rough. And on the inside of it, you're going to have some high salinity water, but you'd have it around the center part here, which is the Mr. Go, the end of the Mr. Go. You have some higher salinity water, and sometimes on the outside of the Biloxi Marsh. But this area along the river is now too fresh, with all of the breaches and the other areas where the river's leaking out of the levees. It's all too fresh. So this used to be good summertime fishing, and if just a few years ago I was fishing there in the summertime, but that's not the case anymore. It's just too fresh. So and the west wind will push all the water from the river over, and it really makes a mess. And so west wind is very hard on this side of the river. If you come on the west side of the river, it's a little bit better. Obviously this is low salinity area, but the high salinity water that's along on the top of Barataria Bay and along all of the Barrier Islands here is still quite accessible, easily accessible. And obviously you can drive to Grand Isle, so I mean that's an area you can fish. And then along Bayou Lafourche, so on the east side of Bayou Lafourche, there's water to get to. On the west side, you can see the marsh comes all the way out to Port Fouchon, which is here in the end. So all of this marsh is going to be high salinity water out here and accessible. And then of course the end of Bayou Lafourche is a section of water called Belle Pass, and it is a bit like the Mr. Go, and then it's a rock line. Part of it is a rock lined deep channel, a shipping channel, and it produces some pretty good fishing. And I was this is the first time I fished it, but I was very pleased at how close it was to the Mr. Go, which I fish a lot, and I love it there, and I love fishing that rock shoreline environment. What a great place. And then so that's accessible in high wind conditions, and as well as the marsh kind of along here. Although one of the problems with Timbalier Bay, this gets really dirty with a west wind, and the high clay dirty, the worst kind of dirty. And then of course over here by out of Cocodrie, there's you've got Trinity Island, and you've got Whiskey Island, and there's marsh pretty much up to it. But Lake Pelto, in my experience, can get very dirty in strong winds. The south or southeast winds, strong winds, it can be pretty dirty. Now you come out to the islands, the Barrier Islands there, and it's very possible to cross Lake Pelto even in fairly rough water, because it's not that far. Although I've fished these islands a fair amount. I mean, some. I haven't found them to be as productive as some of the other barrier islands, and that might be my mistake, but that's just been my experience. And so then, of course, getting out into the rigs that are in Timberlake Bay, Lake Rakashee, and the West Timberlake Island, East Timberlake Island, and these various islands, that's pretty tough to do in strong wind conditions.
Another nice one.
Quirky, huh?
Look at that thing.
That's yeah, it's a decent, probably 16-incher.
Ain't as big as that other one.
Oh yeah, nice fish.
Today's catch and release
Quirky,
day.
man.
Catch and release. Nice fish.
And you know, just a couple of weeks ago, I was down the Levo area fishing, and I went there because there was a very strong southeast wind. I was hoping to go to the Chandeliers on that day, but it was entirely too windy.
Keeper. These little 12 and 13-inchers, what we got today. It's a tough kind of day. Getting about 15 knot winds out of the southeast, south. Really rough. And you know, we're taking what we can get today. It's really can't get out to maybe where the bigger fish are out in the bays. Couldn't get to the islands, but we are finding a few fish here. So
It's targeting the higher salinity water that was along the bay. It couldn't fish the bay, couldn't fish the rigs out there, couldn't get to the barrier islands. But I could fish the marsh area, and I could find localized clean water, and even clean water that was running. So it was an outgoing tide, so I was able to find some water that was draining from smaller bodies of water or inner lakes that was still clean.
decent trout too. Yeah. Oh. That's all right.
We were able to find trout on that day just by using these principles of looking for the localized area of clean water. Today was just killer west wind. I mean, there was some fishing this morning. We were able to catch a few trout this morning, but man, by 10 o'clock the west wind came in and pretty much knocked out. We were hoping to do some beach fishing, but went over to the beach, went out in the Gulf, went out Bell Pass, went out in the Gulf, but the beach was really rough, and it was dirty once you got up to the surf line. Trout fishing is really all about being in the right place, the right time, and they're not going to feed all the time. They're going to feed when the conditions are right, that's when they're going to feed. And so when you can't get the conditions right, really tough. I mean, you can grind out a few fish, but it's really tough to get into many fish. So keep your eye open for the video for day 2 of this Levo fishing trip, where we smashed some trout in the channels, on bare islands, in the marsh, under birds. We hit a bunch of different areas and different styles of fishing. So stay tuned for that coming soon. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, share, and subscribe.